Good morning, Dr. Hayde. How are you this morning?
Morning, I'm fine. How are you
Or good
doing,
afternoon, where you are in Kampala, Uganda. Is it
Yes,
afternoon?
actually, afternoon. Yes, it is.
Thank you
No,
for joining us this morning.
his voice
Thank
has
you.
not changed one iota. How long have you been out there since when you left Trinidad, Dr. Hayde? How long have you been left?
I left officially in 1998 when
Wow.
I went to work for the UN in Rwanda. But administratively, I remained a police officer until 2005 when I officially retired.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So that's almost 20 years.
Yes,
Right.
almost.
Is it correct that you also applied since then for the position of Commissioner of Police?
Yes, I did. You mean in the initial, the first one in 2017, and that's an interesting story in itself.
Would you care to share it with us?
Yes, I went through the entire process. I was over 60 years of age, between 60 and 61 when I applied, and so basically I was at the same age that Ulla Christopher, and then before her, Jacob found themselves at that juncture. And I went through the entire process. And on the final list, I was number 3, from what the Police Service Commission themselves did in their own internal assessment. There were a number of assessments, and people kept leaking things to the press about um, the positions of people at various times. But you remember there were about 5 different processes, including 2 interviews, examinations, assessment, medical reports, and all these things that went into the process. And then at the end of all of that, after the Service Commission did their own assessment, I was number 3. It was
Who were the two persons ahead of you, Dr. Hayde?
Stephen Williams and Gary Griffith.
Okay.
And then overnight, well, maybe not overnight, it seems that the Police Service Commission went to get legal advice from senior counsel that I should not be included in the merit list because I was over 60. Even though it was a contract, it was not like I was in the service and I was proceeding to go into the beyond 60, because in that instance it will fall under the police service regulations for a serving police officer to serve up to a period of 3 extra years. It happened with James Philbert, it happened with Kenny Mohammed before him, and then of course it happened with Jacob for 1 year, and now Ulla Christopher.
Yes.
But in my case, it was a contract. And throughout the entire process, they never made an issue about my age until that time. And then I was knocked out of the merit list, and they brought 2 persons, Deodat Dulalchan and Harold Phillip, who did not apply for commissioner. They applied for deputy commissioner.
How do you mean you were knocked out? What does that mean?
It means that they decided that my name will not go on the merit list because they got legal advice. They never informed me. I don't think they informed the government or the president or anybody, but that decision was made by the Police Service Commission. And the members of the commission included Martin George, sorry. So maybe you should ask him. And that is how my name did not appear on the merit list. Because I felt that had my name been on the merit list, I would have been given favorable consideration by both government side and opposition side. But
because your name was being circulated as the preferred candidate at the time. I remember that.
Well, for some people, but in the end, what ended up happening is that you had Dulalchan first, Harold Phillips second, Stephen Williams third, and Gary Griffith fourth, and they stopped there.
Because so hold up a second there, Dr. Hayde. You're saying that the 2 people who applied for deputy, they didn't apply for commissioner, ended up at the top of the commissioner list?
Yes. And not only that, the Police Service Commission lied when they went before the Joint Committee of Parliament, the JSC, because they were asked, they said that they asked all the candidates whether they wish to be considered for both commissioner and deputy commissioner. Because on the form you had to apply, you have to indicate whether you're applying for commissioner, deputy commissioner, or both. I indicated only commissioner. Harold Phillip and Deodat Dulalchan told me themselves that they did not apply for commissioner. They only applied for deputy. And the Police Service Commission told them that they asked all the candidates whether they wish to be considered for both posts. They never asked me that question. And from what I heard, they never asked that of Gary Griffith either.
Is that the iteration of the commission that collapsed?
Yes.
Oh, well, no surprise.
Marie-Therese, Gomes, well, they seem to be all collapsing for different reasons. But that one had a collapse after. Yeah.
Never at that moment. So you're in Kampala, Uganda.
Yes, I am.
And no doubt, being the patriot that you are, you've had several years in the police service. You were a well-known Calypso. Did you ever Calypso monarch at one point?
No, I came third. I was independence monarch.
Yeah, you did very well in Calypso. We remember, a lot of people remember you from that. So when you look at Trinidad and Tobago and the crime situation, what thoughts come to your mind? What do you think about what's happened? We had a spate of murders, 2 weekends ago. The police are out with different operations now. What are your thoughts on the evolving criminality in this country?
It was to be expected. Because we live in an in-between world. In between a world where violence and crime flourish in many parts of the world, in many countries. At the same time, we live close to a superpower whose policies determine and dictate what you should do in your country with respect to addressing crime. So, for example, they have determined that the death penalty under human rights principles to be considered cruel and unusual punishment. Yet at the same time, in the United States, the death penalty still exists in many states and carried out. But on the international front, their international policy is to dictate and determine what you will what you will have in your laws, whilst at the same time, they will have restrictions, or they will determine, even when they are signing treaties, what reservations they would have to certain parts of those international principles. So that is what Trinidad has faced. A small country with a porous border near a neighbor that is disintegrating in parts in Venezuela, but at the same time dictated by...
Is it that you're linking the inability to apply the death penalty to the evolving criminality in the country? Is that your thesis here?
That is one of it. That is just... I am saying that for heinous crimes, the death penalty should be on the table and should be implemented. And if you remember, there are a lot of jurists in our country and lawyers who went ahead and fought for donkey years to stop us from hanging people, which led to the Pratt and Morgan decision and all of these things. And in the end, what happened? When they wanted to hang people in 1998, didn't they find a way? And then subsequent to that, what did Mr. Vernon Dilemma himself said? One of the staunch defenders of people charged with certain heinous crimes, when he was a victim, and his family was victimized, he understood then. And yes, I am saying that. I know some of you on the panel may have a difference of opinion, on that matter. I am saying at the state of time and affairs that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, we cannot take that off the table, and we should use it. Some of those people cannot be reformed.
Dr. Hayde, going back to your application for Commissioner of Police, if in fact you were appointed Commissioner of Police, what would you have done different to what we have seen thus far? Because you would have had a lot to say about commissioners of police that we would have had here. I would have had the pleasure of listening to some of your lengthy blogs. What would you have done differently?
But you must realize I don't criticize commissioners per se. I try to avoid that, except if they make mistakes or they say something which is not proper, then I would comment on it. But in terms, the commissioner of police job is an extremely difficult job because they want the commissioner to be a ace crime fighter. At the same time, they want the person to be an eloquent spokesman or woman. They want the person to be a politician, to be able to talk to both sides and hold the middle at the same time. And they want the commissioner to be responsible and accountable for everything that happens, even things that are not within his or her control. So one of the things I think I'm good at is advocacy. And I was not going to be, as commissioner, sitting down and not talking like how I am now about the things that the police service needs. For example, we cannot talk about addressing gun crime whilst at the same time having a revolving door for criminals coming in and out of jails for gun-related offenses. But as commissioner of police, I don't control that part of it, but I can advocate for what is to be done and would not shut up until some change takes place. But internally in the service, there are problems. Discipline has broken down. People are not being charged for departmental offenses anymore and being taken to task. What you see happening, for example, is that anything a police officer does, they want to charge the officer for misbehavior in public office, which has now become the favorite crime or the only crime that seems to exist in the country in terms of dealing with officials. Misbehavior in public office. And once you do that, you have removed your ability to address the discipline of that police officer because the case will take 10 years, 15 years to be tried. And by that time, the witnesses die, change their mind, the file gets lost, rat eat the cocaine or whatever, and then it's all lost. And the power to discipline has been given back to the commissioner several years ago, but yet still no action is taken. There are officers who are bringing the service into disrepute, and they should be charged for that and dismissed. Whilst you do that, it still does not prevent you from taking them to the criminal court under that particular standard. But right now, we keep talking about corruption in the service, but we have done nothing internally to remove the corrupt persons. You understand? And I argued, and some of you would have heard, of course, that I'm saying the failure of the service is because of kinship, friendship, and relationships. Unfortunately, myself, I have an attitude, I don't care.
What does that mean? What are you saying that nepotism and batch connections, etc., is one of the reasons that the police can't self-regulate and purge itself of the errant elements? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that exactly. But not just batch, because batches go. I'm talking about the friendship that occurs between people within the service, or the relationships, personal and otherwise. And yes, people bringing in their friends, their family, their concubines, everybody into the work. And then people are afraid to talk to people or to discipline them because they know somebody else in the work that they could talk to and make life difficult. That has permeated the service to a large extent. And then at the same time, the training aspect of the service that in creating that esprit de corps has broken down because they have made the training college or the training almost like a high school, where people could go home and come back when they wish and not have to do certain menial tasks and things that help to build an esprit de corps and to build a certain level of discipline and to let them know that no matter where they come from in society, they all become equal. But from the time they decided to stop people with school living certificates like myself from entering the service and make it an academic meritocracy, people lost all faith in having in the service as a place where they will build themselves, build their careers, and build the country.
Well, I want to go back to your point, Dr. Hayde, about the issues of the indiscipline in the police service, because one of the things that came out of the recent JSC National Security when the heads of divisions were there is 3 out of the 4 indicated that one of the biggest challenges when asked in the police service, they used the word culture change, which I thought was a euphemism for discipline. Then what of the Professional Standards Bureau and the Police Complaints Authority? Is it that they are important in dealing with these issues?
Yes, they are. The Police Complaints Authority is an external body and does not have legal or even practical authority to demand or get or interfere with certain aspects of the police service in terms of going inside and knowing what is happening. And a lot of them, most of them, are civilians who don't understand the culture of the police service. The professional standards section is part of the service. So is himself to himself. You go back to the same thing about kinship, friendship, relationships will have an impact on how their ability to even challenge or discipline or attempt to discipline their own or some of the officers who are senior to them. And that remains an element of
but there's nobody more senior than the Commissioner of Police. There's no one more senior than the Commissioner of Police and the DCPs. So if we are to accept your thesis that there is an indiscipline / corruption issue, in some instances the indiscipline leads to corruption, then it's an absence of action on the part of the leadership of the police service that you're suggesting is partly to blame for the continued indiscipline and or corruption.
And let me add to that. Let me add to that, Dr. Hayde. Let me add to that. Because which is the reason why when you had applied, you were popular, and when Gary Griffith got it, he was also popular because he didn't come from that culture. And we thought that we would have seen that change. So, but we're still here. We worse off than we were before.
Well, there's a difference. Gary Griffith was never a police officer. And so he was never part of that culture and understanding of that internal culture. I was, or I am. So I had an insight into even knowing those people personally, and they knew that I had a propensity to speak my mind, to act when needs to be something needs to be acted upon, and not be afraid to pull the devil by the tail, as it were. But internally, there's a trickle-down effect. You have to remember that in the disciplinary system, it is certain officers who are authorized to conduct disciplinary tribunals, let's say. And I know about disciplinary tribunals because I represented maybe 100 police officers during my time in the Association for Disciplinary Offenses. So I know the process. But what happens after that? The commissioner himself or herself will be aware that there are people within the service that somehow you can't seem to be able to touch them. Because today they are police officer and tomorrow they're sitting in parliament. Or they're on the stump making speeches. So therefore, internally, that has had an effect and an impact on the ability of those who want to do something. There are officers who give them the opportunity, they will do something. They will act on it and they will take action. But on the left and on the right, they're not sure who will be their bedfellows when it's time to take that action.
Dr. Hayde, are you surprised by the revelations coming out of the Strategic Services Agency?
No, I'm not surprised.
Why?
Because we saw similar things happening in the past. Where sometimes, look, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And you need and you must have that kind of entity within your society and within your governmental structure. But there must be a certain level of control. And the question would be, who is going to guard the guards? Because once you put the persons in there and there's insufficient oversight, then all of these things are going to happen. You remember in the old days
Pause. So what? Because every agency, SSA, SAUTT, SORT, ABCDEFGHIJK, fall under the ambits overall of the Ministry of National Security. And then it comes down whether it be the police service, the defense force, the Coast Guard, etc. What, to your knowledge, was or should have been the oversight mechanism for an agency like the SSA? And why did that oversight mechanism fail so abysmally?
Well, I'm aware that you are part of an oversight committee. And the issues that are supposed to be raised with respect to problems internally must come through a process whereby the ills can be aired. It is not one person's responsibility to do it. Let me give an example, which is I see happening now. The former Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith, has made an allegation against the Prime Minister with respect to allocation of resources and what was supposed to be the reason for those resources. But nobody is asking the question then, okay, what happened to the resources? Was it spent in the way that was dictated? Because if it was, it meant that the commissioner was also part of the conspiracy and also committed an offense. If the prime minister in fact committed an offense.
But the former commissioner made the allegation about the alleged dictate for the money. The commissioner never said that he acquiesced.
But that's the point. So the point to be made is this. That is where the evidence, and for those of you who are lawyers will know that evidence is very important, and the linkage between one thing to the other. You can't just say I was given this money to do this, but I spent the money on something else. How was the money spent? And then you go back into the paperwork to look to see what the money was actually allocated for and what happened on the ground.
For the record, the Prime Minister's denied. So let's put all the information on the table.
I agree. And that's the point I'm making, is that you see these allegations being out there, but nobody wants to ask the hard questions. And the same thing happened with the SSA. There are hard questions to be asked. Who allowed the transfers of firearms from one entity to another without oversight?
Anyway,
well, welcome back,
Dr. Wade, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much.
Wayne Hayde.
Sorry.
We're saying Wade, it's Hayde.
It's Hayde. But by my name, I've been called everything. Out here, they don't know the name Wayne Hayde, so they call me Whiny Hayde sometimes. Just looking at the
like that though. Whiny Hayde.
Right. So before we had that technical interruption, you were talking about questions that needed to be asked and answered.
Yes. And with respect to the SSA, too many things were happening that nobody seemed to be paying attention to. Now, there are linkages, and when I saw some of the reports coming out and a pastor is in charge or virtually in charge, not de jure, but de facto, from what it appeared, or had some control over the people of the SSA, that was stunning to me. And I wanted to know, why did it take so long for someone to notice that something is going wrong? Look, I have said some things that has been controversial, and I would say it. I was always fearful that the illegal guns in Trinidad will be joined with the legal ones, which seem to have been handed out willy-nilly to people, that could be used together to initiate another 1990 or something worse than that. And wow. I am not making any allegations against anybody, but I would say, when you are having firearms unaccounted for in the hands of people who have access to information that the rest of us don't have, and when you have people being granted firearm users license with variations, and maybe I should start by asking the people on the panel here, how many of you have received FULs in the last few years? Because
not me.
I am worried when you hear people receiving 7 firearms, 10, 20, 30, and above. That is not for use in self-protection.
Well, Dr. Hayde, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. In other words, how would you have treated with a situation like that? What are your thoughts on the exponential rise in the issuance of firearm users license? You kind of started to answer it already, so maybe you could go a little deeper.
Yes. I have no objection to granting firearm users license to people who I believe should have it and ought to have it for different reasons. Because, licenses could be for personal protection. It could be for hunting. It could be for killing pests on your farm. It could be for being part of shooting clubs and so on. It could even be for starting pistols and so on to start races. And I have felt in the past that the commissioners were too restrictive in terms of the amounts that they were granting to people. My own philosophy is, in 1990, early 1990s, especially 1992, when I was president of the Police Association, which, by the way, I founded together with Christopher Holder, we advocated for arming police officers whilst they were off duty. And that was one of the biggest fights we had with the commissioner at the time, Jules Bernard in particular. There was only some ease when Kenny Mohammed became commissioner, and he began issuing firearms to police officers when they were off duty. And then when the next commissioner, Hilton Guy, came in, he locked it back down. I have said my own philosophy is that I will not wait for people who I believe are in situations where they need firearms, especially for personal protection, to apply for one. I will invite them to apply. And judges, magistrates, members of parliament, persons, businessmen and women, persons doing jobs that place them at risk. Look how long it took for us to arm prison officers. It shouldn't have taken that long. But it doesn't mean that when you make an application, you automatically get it, because there must be a process of vetting. And then, besides vetting, if there's evidence that comes out that you are involved in anything which makes you a risk, then if I issue a firearm to you, I will take it back. Like, for example, if you have a firearm user's license and then you get charged for rape, I would say, or sedition, or sedition, or anything of that nature, I would remove your firearm immediately, because I think that you can pose a risk not only to the victims, but also to yourself.
But do you agree with the recent charge of sedition being laid against the blogger Chris Hughes?
Well, I don't know the facts involved in the case to make an assumption as to whether the evidence supports the charge. What I would say is this, that the charge of sedition is extremely hard to prove. And unless they have evidence within his telephone and other instruments that they seized that show that he was encouraging, supporting, or leading these persons to make statements and perform acts against the state, then I think that the charge will not hold. But as I said, I don't know what evidence they have collected in the interim.
Yeah.
They might
I
have
was
had
always a bit of a stretch anyway, but you know, earlier you talked about academic qualifications and the academic meritocracy to enter the police service. Is it that you're saying that you think they should revert to what existed before?
I have made this argument, and I have said, I have said, like, for example, to enter the service, I entered the service with a school living certificate because I never attended secondary school. I began studying in the service from the age of 25 on the advice of Dr. Dorel Charles Phillip, who was teaching a police course for persons to be detectives. And she advised me to do it because she saw something in me. And I took the advice, and I spoke to one of my batches who was in the course, speaking of friendship. And he said, yeah, let's go and do it and go and study. And he studied as well, became an attorney like me, also became a member of the Police Service Commission and a member of the Integrity Commission. So there's nothing that says that those with lower levels of education can't come in and do well in the service. My advice is that they should do an equivalency exam where the persons who don't have the requisite O levels can write that equivalency exam that they will pay for. And if they pass it, then they are put on the same footing as the other candidates. But I always believe that when I joined the service because it was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a policeman, and my choices in terms of a profession or a life was limited based on where I came from and my educational background. And the police was a place that offered me that sanctuary and helped to build me into the individual I am today.
What steps do you think should be taken presently by the police or whatever agencies available in the fight against crime to seriously make incursions and sustainable incursions into crime in this country? What do you think is missing in the approach?
What is missing is, one, legislation that makes mandatory sentencing available for gun-related crimes. That must be on the table. All gun crimes must have mandatory sentencing. As you get caught, you go to jail and you remain there with an escalating amount.
What do you mean by that? For the purposes of the audience, what do you mean by mandatory sentencing? On the point of facing the judicial officer?
Once you are tried, you're charged for an offense. Let's say it's possession of firearm. The penalty on conviction should be a mandatory 10 years imprisonment. Unless you enter into a plea bargaining and it can be reduced to, let's say, 7 or 6. But once you go through the process and you get convicted, 10 years for possession, gun parts, 15 years for if you use the firearm in use of certain offenses with an escalator. So 20 years or 25 years if you use it and you engage in a rape or home invasions, those kinds of things. If you don't do that, you are not going to make those guys change their mind with respect to how they treat people once they have the guns. And the bail act, yes, they must remain in prison. You cannot solve the problem by saying that you could reform or redeem those persons. The stable door is open, the horse has already gone. That must happen. And if you and then in addition to which, you must have changes in the structure of policing. The old method still works. You just have to add it to the new method.
So you're saying some people are you saying some people are beyond rehabilitation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm saying that.
Even if they're 18,
Yes,
19, even if they're that young?
If they have 10 bodies on them, if they have 10 bodies on them, yes.
But we're talking about firearm possession. They may not have killed anybody. But if you're talking about mandatory sentencing, then it means the nuances are not available.
No, the nuances are available. I just said if you go through a plea bargaining process, it can be reduced. And also too, look, when you were 18 years old, or anyone on the panel, I'm sure you were not in possession of firearms looking to rob and kill and shoot people. So we like to say that, okay, a person is an adult at 18 years of age and a minor at 17, but the world has changed. They can do anything they want at 18 years of age. Why can't they do hard time if they're doing hard crime? I know we like to think that our children or relatives are not beyond redemption, but that is for the religion. That is not for when they're shooting people on the streets and killing people in their cars. Any one of you could become a victim tomorrow. Not because they targeted you, but because you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they don't care. Once you start making examples, maybe you don't have to make examples of everybody, but you make examples of some, I am telling you, it is going to change. Look, I have been in countries where we don't make those arguments. Okay? Where I'm in Uganda here, for example, if you get caught with a firearm, you're going before a military tribunal. And yes, you could get the death penalty in some instances and long jail sentences. But so the difference is that in all the murders that they're committed in Uganda, which is like a 10% of on the scale, if you're looking at to what happens in Trinidad, given the population, only about 6%, if so much, are committed with firearms. Contrast that with Trinidad and Tobago and see how much are committed with firearms. If you don't understand that you have a gun problem rather than having a crime problem, then you're sadly mistaken. If you remove the guns from the equation, all of the other issues you're talking about in terms of reform, in terms of rehabilitation, in terms of addressing domestic violence, mental issues, and other issues that
you spoke, Dr. Hayde, a lot about the legally issued guns, but you haven't touched on the preponderance, because the evidence is that most of the crimes are being committed by illegal firearms coming into the country illegally, which we have not been able to stymie. What are your thoughts on that, and why we have not been able to, through legal ports, coming into the country?
Because we have allowed corruption among certain entities in the country to remain for so long, and nobody is taking action to address it. But if you let's deal with the illegal firearms. I bet you, if people found in possession of illegal firearms, even those who are importing or transporting or moving, go to jail for a long time, you will see a sudden drying up.
But you have to find the ones who illegally importing it. You have to find them first. You have to identify them and charge them.
No, you don't. Sometimes you don't always have to go top down. You could go bottom up. What you need to do, the danger to the society are those who shooting others and killing people with the guns.
You have no argument with me there. But those are the ones who are ending up on the wrong set of bullets to the tune of 300 every year. They are ones, unfortunately, being replaced by new ones, while the importers are not being identified and or charged.
I agree with you on that. But how are we going to identify them? First, we have to have control systems within the country through the ports and through our customs and branches and so on. That is where the majority of guns are coming. But then you have a porous border because we are next to Venezuela. You think tons of guns are not coming through Venezuela? We were always part of the transshipment route for cocaine from South America. So therefore, guns accompanied the shipment. But now you have a disintegration of Venezuela, which could lead to greater propensity for firearms coming across the border. What do? Then maybe we should do like they do here and put them, you face the death penalty for certain possession of certain firearms. For example, automatic firearms. Would you agree or not agree that if someone is found in possession, let's say of an automatic firearm, that they should not come out of jail except in the most extenuating circumstances while on bail, and we've convicted, serve 25 years in jail? Don't you think that that will have a chilling effect?
The recent amendment of the Bail Act speaks to that.
No, it does not speak to sentencing. And let me tell you, as we're talking about that, our judiciary are good at the law, but they are not good at really protecting the society from the criminals. Because they are more concerned about every aspect of human rights that has been violated, which we sometimes brought upon ourselves, because in Singapore, for example, and I used to be in Singapore a lot, it will catch you spraying graffiti on the walls illegally, you could get sentenced and get lashes. If they find you in importing drugs into the country, you face the death penalty. And in Indonesia, where a lot as well.
Dr. Hayde,
yeah,
we're out of time, but I'm going to ask you to commit to come back next week with us to continue this conversation, because it's a really interesting conversation, and we would love to have you next week if you are available and are willing. Is that okay?
Yes, I'm a retiree now.
Because we have a lot to discuss, and based on the responses from the chat, people are really enjoying your contribution. So we're going to put a pause here and invite you back next week. I'll be in contact offline, and we will continue this conversation in many other areas of life in Trinidad and Tobago next week. Okay?
Thank you very much.